Hello there, cool guys and cool gals. Today we have something very special. A retroactive look at Nintendo's long-awaited 15-year return to the Super Mario Bros. Series after Super Mario World's release in making a 2D platformer once again. Something that Nintendo put so much time, passion, and thought into this development that they bravely slapped the word new right across the cover art so that everyone would see how truly amazing and badass it is. Look, they even gave Mario the Mega Mushroom power-up that makes him 30 times as big as everything else in the game. It had the potential to be the greatest game in the series, if Nintendo had followed through. In spite of Nintendo's grand reintroduction to its own series and throwing the marker of newness right on the damn box, the game wasn't presented with much pomp or circumstance judging from the entire 4 months that Nintendo put between the game's first showcase to the world and its actual release, along with a disastrous 2-week delay of its original release date, which to some may look like a promising adherence to quality, yet could also be explained by the game's total lack of content. In a hilarious bit of irony, Nintendo's pride came before a colossal fall as the game was finally released, and players were shown that Nintendo then decided to cordon off a whole 2 worlds, amounting to nearly 15 levels of Mario platforming, off of the main path to the end of the game. If you're counting at home, that amounts to a spectacular loss of 25% of the game's content for no goddamn reason. It's hilarious because that means that a not unsubstantial amount of thought and development time ended up going into levels and challenges that almost 0 players actually got to because the restrictions to get them are ridiculous. I'm actually gonna go off script for this part to give you an idea of how mind-bogglingly stupid this move was. I seriously want to make it clear to you out there in the audience how fucking stupid this idea was that Nintendo came up with to somehow justify these extra worlds that were sectioned off as side missions of the regular game, even though this game is incredibly short, and we'll talk about that later. But the actual requirement to get to Worlds 3 and World 5, I believe, is to go back to the boss fights of Worlds 2 and Worlds 4, if I'm still correct, grab a mini mushroom, you know, those blue things that are incredibly hard to find in the actual game unless you go back to World 2 and pick one up because they just happen to give you one. I think to try and kind of justify the requirement itself by not making it too difficult to find one, but is incredibly transparent to its own bullshit. Anyway, grab the mini mushroom, go back to the boss fight, and then you have to defeat the boss using the mini mushroom, which means that your normal jumps don't do anything, and you have to ground pound on top of the enemy to actually do any damage. And I know how retarded these boss fights are, they can barely move without falling down all the time, but it's incredibly bullshit because the mini mushroom puts you in the most vulnerable state it's possible to be. You are the tiniest thing in the game, you can take 1 damage before dying, and then everything else is just a complete farce. What's the fucking point? The only way that Mario was supposed to get to these worlds is because when you run past it to the next world, there's a tiny flippin' hole underneath the frickin' signpost of which you run past, and if you're mini, then you happen to fit in the hole, and then the signpost gets flipped because Mario's running around it? What the hell kind of idea was that, Nintendo? These are the stupidest fucking things that you did. And again, the game's incredibly short. You could have used the 25% additional content you cordoned off to freaking add on to that, especially since you wanted this to also be a Super Mario Bros. 3 multiplayer experience for flip's sake. I mean, for the love of God, Nintendo, were you even thinking? So that's that. The move gets even more baffling when you realize that this game thought itself highly enough to deserve a Super Mario Bros. 3 style competitive co-op mode in Nintendo's new download play system. Except Nintendo completely missed the point to why it's fun to do that in 3. The frequent free gambling and power-ups meant that you had to be strategic in beating levels or using items to progress so that you could beat the other player to the punch, with the levels sprawling all over the place for strategies to develop instead of this linear track with perhaps 1 branching path to be found on each world, at the expense of some of New Super Mario Bros. Yoshi coins, the collectibles of this game, which is just facepalm worthy. You simply can't make a game mechanic out of strategically spending a limited resource because there's no way to get them back once they're spent, whereas Super Mario Bros. 3's free power-ups would sometimes appear at random times to keep the concept fun. it doesn't even make sense as a way to increase competition because you end up pooling the Yoshi coins together in one pot instead of between each player differently. And this even further highlights the pointlessness of Nintendo sectioning off its own game content, because the levels of those branching paths in the worlds you would actually play through will never get seen because there's no point to 100%ing the game, and there's no gameplay benefit for playing those levels beyond the playtime itself. And you want to know what the real kicker is? Factoring in the entire 8 worlds into total playtime rounds out to New Super Mario Bros. Being a 5-hour game. And if you remember the 25% slashing of the total content for a typical player, that would actually be under 4. That right there is the true stupidity of Nintendo's walling off of content, is that they desperately needed it all to be there since the game is insultingly short otherwise, and putting in everything that they worked on would have gotten that playtime up to somewhere acceptable. And speaking of stupid additions to the Mario series, you remember that Mega Mushroom that was touted on the front of the damn box as a means of getting people to buy the damn game? You want to know how many times you can find it? 2 or 3 throughout the whole runtime. It is so incredibly rare that it might as well be non-existent. It is easier to find a damn mini mushroom than that ridiculous mega thing, and that rings true for the other power-ups as well. The blue turtle shell that gives Mario a sliding tackle that can be really useful if you figure it out. But then again, the power-up is so rare that by the time you have a chance of figuring out how it works, you would have already lost every single one that you would have ever found in the entire game. The game usually defaults to the Super Mario Bros. Style tiny mushroom fire flower progression without change. And since we're on the topic of moving forward, let's talk about the plot of this game. It's stupid, juvenile, and something I could have come up with in 5 seconds. How does Princess Peach get kidnapped this time around? Mario gets distracted by a thundercloud hanging around the castle, and Bowser Jr. just happens to pick up her dopey ass and books it for the nearest safe zone. And this happens every single damn frickin' double fuck time that Mario defeats the little bastard. Yeah, that's right. Bowser Jr. is the true antagonist of this game instead of the big guy in charge, which says a lot about Nintendo's thought process in making this piece of shit. Bowser is relegated to the background character using the exact same moronic self-destruct bridge thing from his appearance of 20 years ago. He's such a useless character in New Super Mario Bros. That the poor guy ends up dying after his first appearance. At the very least, Nintendo gave us the character of Dry Bowser in this game, which has an awesome, intimidating design, and it's pretty screwed up how Nintendo goes so far as to show Bowser's skin melting off and transforming him into his skeletal version that, of course, has the exact same boss fight as his living counterpart in the final level of the game. It's just... This game is filled with so much contempt for its audience and its series that it's not even a joke anymore. It's a punchline served on top of a fuck you. Remember, this game was touted by its own creators as the glorious return to a legendary series full of promise and new ideas, yet it can't even be fucked to come up with anything original to serve up. The new power-ups are maybe found a total of 5 times throughout the entire game's 5-hour run, and what you're doing as normal gameplay feels like a shitty ROM hack some backwoods asshole of the internet made without any idea of what they were doing, rather than a full-funded project of a developer nearly into their 7th generation of consoles. And that leads us to another thing we have to talk about, because we've been seeing it throughout this entire video without flipping the bird at it. It's fucked in the head idea of what the hell graphics are supposed to be. Give me a sec, going off script again. Yeah, so to start off this little bit here, I'm gonna compare New Super Mario Bros., the gameplay footage we've been seeing throughout this entire video, to Super Mario 64 DS. the DS's launch title and was released a year before this game ever existed, or was even an idea, because this was obviously a year-long development. Look at Super Mario 64 DS. This was the first Mario game on the Nintendo DS. This was their first chance to show what 3D graphics were supposed to look like on a console now that it has the full power. You want to look at this? You want to look at this remake of a game that was so incredibly bad with its graphics because it was the first 3D game that Mario ever made and looked like it was made of building blocks? You want to look what they did to it now? That thing looks fucking beautiful. That is 3D goddamn art right there. It's amazing that Nintendo was able to pull this out for its first shot. And now let's go back to New Super Mario Bros. Look at this. Look at this. It's still a comparison piece. I want you to see the pixelated garbage in front of you. Look at this shit. Look at what Nintendo is trying to serve up as 3D graphics in a 2.5D frickin' platformer. Because it's a 2D platform with 3D graphics, and maybe this game shows why you shouldn't do that. Because it looks horrible. Look at it. It's got frickin' pixels all over the place. It's got things missing. You can barely tell the details of anything apart because it's all such a frickin' blurry mess. And again, the true punchline of this is that New Super Mario Bros. Was the fourth game for the Mario series on the Nintendo DS. 4! They had 3 other opportunities to see how graphics should work on this DS, but didn't give enough of a shit to even try. And that's why I wanted to compare it to Super Mario 64 DS. Not because it's just the first Mario game out there, was made before this game even existed as an idea, but because it was the first. Because the 3D graphics look amazing for it. It was able to do 3D competently. And then Nintendo comes out with this shit and expects us to frickin' even not laugh at it or take it seriously? How incredibly stupid do you think your audience is for them to even think that this is acceptable? It's a fuzzy, pixelated, tiny fucking mess, Nintendo. It's terrible, it's soupy, it fucking sucks, and you damn well know it. This is completely unacceptable. I can't even say... This is the most mind-boggling thing about this fucking game. Not the plot, not the gameplay, not the things that weren't added, not the new moniker on the front of the game, the fucking graphics! They're unacceptable level, they're juvenile, they look like a frickin' money laundering developer made these games. This looks like what N-Space would come up with. And this came out of frickin' Nintendo. This came out of their handheld division when the Mario series was making money on the damn thing. I honestly can't believe it. I can't believe it exists. I can't believe I can show you this comparison at all. It just blows my goddamn mind. It says a lot when a game's graphics can range from terrible to actually distracting, and how the 3D somehow manages to blur everything into pixelated nonsense. But between that and the lie of Nintendo injecting some life and vibrancy into the Super Mario Bros. Series after 15 years of slumber, back when Super Mario World was released for the goddamn SNES, and they just decided to reskin old ideas from Super Mario Bros. 1 and 3. The insultingly short game and the aggravating carrot-chasing plot with Bowser Jr. starring as antagonist makes this a truly awful Mario game in a time where Nintendo should have known better. This was probably only a handful of months after Super Princess Peach's release created a totally revamped 2D platformer with concepts blatantly unheard of in the Mario canon being developed by a supporting developer. And yet, with all their money and their talent, the actual Nintendo side of things crap out this schlock that any competent ROM hacker can kick to pieces with only 2 years of solo development. New Super Mario Bros. Is an absolute embarrassment of a once legendary series falling into a bad racket, because in those 15 years of slumber, the veterans of Nintendo forgot how to actually make Mario games, thinking they can fall back on nostalgia to push units, which was actually true. Apparently this fucking game right here that I've already compared to fucking DS's launch title was actually the highest selling DS game ever, and I just have to ask one question: why? It's a 5-hour failure of a Super Mario Bros. Remake with 25% of its runtime cut out for no reason. This game doesn't even have the typical Mario Special World bonus content. It just ends with a half-hearted kiss in the game's only instance of actual dialogue. Hopefully Nintendo will be able to answer these questions and more later on in the series, but for next week, we'll finally be moving on to Nintendo's lightning in a bottle, the Wii, to look forward to with its newfangled hardware and the things that come along with it. Until then, I'll leave you with this final scoreboard. And a thankful victory for gamers for sticking with me through all this. I'll see you guys next time for hopefully a less angry review.